This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. KCM Wealth Management. A man walks into a grocery store. He holds up the clerk, let's say at gunpoint, makes off with a few dollars, but he's apprehended. And before you know what's happening, he's involved in a traditional trial. Let's say this person is found guilty of something or other. The issue then is, what do we do with this fellow? And what do we do for the clerk and the owner of the store and perhaps the passersby and anybody else who may have been caught up in what we can call an untoward moment? Traditionally, we simply sentence the fellow. Of late, we have victim statements, but maybe we can take it a bit further, and that's where a concept called restorative justice jumps in. It's not new, but it certainly has been getting traction all over the world of late, and particularly right here in British Columbia. That largely to the efforts of our guest, Dr. Brenda Morrison, who is the director of the Center for Restorative Justice at Simon Fraser University, a social psychologist involved with school violence, safety, conflict, cooperation, co-chair of Safe Schools, etc., American Education Research Association, involved with World Congress of Criminology, among other things, and the North Shore Restorative Justice Society. Thank you so much, Brenda, for joining us. Yep. How old is this idea? It seems to me it must go way back somewhere in some culture. It
goes way back in our own indigenous cultures here in North America, and it goes way back to Roman and Greek cultures in Europe. It's an old concept, and I think as we've evolved as nations, we've forgotten it a bit, and I think it's time to go back and revisit some of those ideas, and because I think we're stuck in our story about justice, and we need to move forward.
You told an interesting story in your lovely piece in The Sun about a month ago, comparing the fallout of the riots, the hockey riot in Vancouver, and similar riots in London, England. And a part of that story interested me. Just tell that little piece of the story about the one individual that you told.
The one, the young.
Yeah, you told a story about a young man, a store manager, and so the young person really wanted to right the wrong, and he signed a contract agreeing to do so, and you say he's following through with his agreement, but I want to hear the details. What is it this fellow has agreed to do?
So, in that particular story, so in England, who experienced the riots at the same time, or just after our riots in Vancouver, the choice there was to move forward with the criminal justice process and the restorative justice process simultaneously. So this young man was already going through a traditional criminal justice process. He had a conviction. And then he was invited to be part of a pilot study for a restorative justice process that invites the people left out of the criminal justice process into a conversation, because the contest in the criminal justice process is determining guilt or innocence between the offender and the state. So communities are left out, victims' voices are left out. So the idea is to bring those people into a conversation. And so in this particular case, for the store owner, this was a KFC down in Brixton, in the tough part of town, so to speak, and he really wanted to express the immense pressure, the immense impact that night that he was on him and his staff, and he thought it was really important for his own well-being and his staff.
Like what? He lost sleep. He was nervous.
Well, no, and they were traumatized. They were there was a lot of residual trauma,
post-traumatic stress disorder
associated with that event, and he thought it would be very therapeutic for himself and his staff just to express that directly to the person who impacted them the most.
Yes.
And this one young person involved in the riots agreed to step up and said, you know, I need to do this. I need to take responsibility.
So just so that our audience understands, you have the aggrieved, the victims of crime, sitting across a table and saying, look, son, I want you to understand what this did to me.
Yeah.
They're not yelling and screaming and calling him names.
No. It's about expressing the way that the event impacted them, in this case the riots, and for them to have a voice in the process. So it's about direct accountability. Right now our criminal justice system is accountability to the state.
Yes.
It's important to have accountability to the direct victims and the community at large as well.
So what did this young man then do? He said, okay, I got it, I'm dreadfully sorry, I behaved like an ass. And,
right, he did all those things, and as he spoke, the store owner became to realize that this young man was truly remorseful about his actions and his decisions to participate in the riot, and he gained more and more respect for this young person, more than he saw in the court, for example, that he was truly, remorseful about what he did, and in that process, the manager began to say, well, I'm beginning to respect this man a little bit more, this young man, for stepping forward, and so the long and the short of it is actually that he agreed to work in the KFC and participate in some community development work in around the KFC, because that's the area that was mostly directly impacted.
The convicted young man agreed to work in the shop
voluntarily, as part of his, in addition to what the court had ordered. This young man said, whatever you need me to do, I'm going to step up and do it, because I know that I've wronged you and I'm willing to step forward.
This is about a week ago. This UBC student was caught on camera stealing 2 pairs of men's pants from a ransacked Black & Lee store. After watching the hockey game and consuming alcohol, she and 2 friends, this is a young woman, headed into the melee and so on and so on. She was arrested, and then she published a lengthy apology letter on the internet saying, look, I was intoxicated, I was influenced by mob mentality. In his decision, what was his decision? The Vancouver Provincial Court has handed her 2 years probation, 150 hours of community service. So, to your knowledge, was this a restorative justice exercise?
No, that wasn't restorative. Because it's more about first-party decision-making rather than third-party decision-making. Our court system uses a lot of third-party decision-making, and that's part in terms of addressing the needs of the state. Restorative justice is about first-party decision-making, and so the community service, the people that were most impacted by that particular crime would have a greater voice in what the community service should be.
The Black & Lee store.
That's right.
Okay, and what do you think might have been a better scenario in this instance?
Well, it's hard to know because I don't know the full particulars, but it's it's adding the voice of the community and those most directly impacted back into the justice equation, and that's how I think we need to expand and strengthen our justice system, because justice happens every day, and if we stick with the story that justice, our story about justice, which is about determining guilt and innocence, and then the amount of punishment, we can go beyond that. And
let's take the idea of justice even further. For example, in this story of this young woman, I got drunk and I got caught up in the moment. So let's say that she were involved in a restorative justice exercise. Would we just hypothetically, would we take it even a step further? Let's say she apologizes, shows true remorse. Let's say she volunteers to help out, volunteers to pay for the window, whatever. Would we take it as far as to say, young lady, if you got drunk and decided to jump into the fray, you have an alcohol problem? Would we go that far?
Absolutely. A lot of the outcomes that come out of these face-to-face conversations are those effect, because she would bring to get her community of care together in the conversation, and often there's really important insights in there, and they say, it wasn't just caught up in the moment. You might need support around this, and so part of the conditions with that for that young person to go to
Go to a program.
Go to a program of some
Or
type.
work on your drinking.
But because these are people that are meaningful and involved in her everyday life, they have a better chance to get through, to influence her, and then support her through that process.
In your experience to date, speaking of the other players, do families typically get involved? The families of the guilty, of the accused?
On both sides,
Yes.
on the victim side and
Yes.
on the offender side,
Yeah.
we always invite a community of support because they have the leverage and the influence to get through to that young person.
I noticed you
and
did something
support
very interesting. You put offender in
Well, that's right.
in whatever these things
Right,
are. Are you telling me basically you don't believe in offenders?
No, I think people need to be accountable, but
Yes.
a lot of the offenders that we're talking about, say in the case of the riot, are alleged offenders.
Yeah.
And often we get part of the reason that restorative justice, we like to separate the person from their behavior, because when we stigmatize them as offenders, the label sticks for a long time. And so in some sense, we like to separate, it's important to separate the
Give me a couple
behavior
of minutes
from
before we're going to go to break in a moment, Brenda. Give me a couple of minutes about the Aboriginal history here in terms of restorative justice and how Aboriginals are really not only grabbing onto this today, but I get the feeling that they're actually pushing for more of this.
It's important that Aboriginals do get more involved in these sort of processes. They're more traditional in terms of a cultural experience of justice, but it's also really important because we have disproportional representative
Absolutely.
of First Nations people in our criminal justice process.
Yeah.
And so it's really important that we become more involved and committed to alternative measures and finding ways to create just communities.
This is a very interesting and delicately balanced issue because on the one hand, without providing excuses for bad behavior, without providing excuses for committing crimes, on the other hand, we have to look at the fact that Aboriginals have been judged in a completely other culture and language, right? And it's been so inappropriate so often.
Oh, it's very true. But you also have to look at ways of influence. If we really want to support this young person to change their ways, who's best to influence and support them? That's a really important question to ask because the influence happens from people that you trust, that you respect. Having third-party judges wave their finger or police officers wave, and where there's little sense of influence might create more of a backlash than true influence that this person needs to change their ways and make some different decisions in their lives.
This goes back though centuries, does it not? For
absolutely.
Aboriginals.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a lot to atone for in terms of addressing.
But the whole process of a different approach to justice goes
absolutely.
back
It goes
many
back
centuries.
Many centuries. And people like Judge Barry Stewart, when he knew he had to do something different up in the Yukon as a circuit judge up there, he said, well, what would you do? And he started asking different questions, and that led to some really important reforms in terms of our justice system.
Okay, we'll take a little break. When we come back, I want to talk about how this forces us to look at conflict not as a disaster, but as an opportunity.
Great.
All right, we'll take a little break, folks, and thank all our wonderful people who support us here in this program. Remind you that davidberner.com is the site to go to, and it's brand new. I totally revised it. I haven't done a lot with it lately because I've been busy with a couple of big projects, but in October I'll get busy with that website and it'll sparkle a bit more, but it's an improvement, believe me, and you can contact us through that. So thanks to these lovely people who helped make this program possible here on Shaw Community Television, Cable 4. Back in a minute. This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. KCM Wealth Management. the Trial Lawyers Association of BC. It's traditional to think of conflict as a very bad thing. We think of it as war and so on, and then we watch Monday Night Football and wonder where it's all gone. But conflict, if you look at it a little more creatively, is often the door opening to a deeper understanding, but it takes kind of being on your toes, does it not, Dr. Brenda Morrison?
Absolutely. We often, especially in instances of injustice,
yes,
we just want to shut it down. We want it to go away.
I want to take this to an extreme, if I may. Robbery and skullduggery and smashing windows, that's one thing. But I have a friend, actually I have several friends who have had this experience. One of them is in my mind because it's happened recently. He had to go to a prison once again to hear a parole hearing for a guy who murdered someone very close to him. Mm. This guy's not going to get a parole, but the law says he has to be heard. Okay. So my friend has to go through the agony of reliving not just the death and the loss of a young friend at the time, but the murder, the violent taking of life. Yeah. Is there any possibility for restorative justice in such extreme instances?
Absolutely. And
tell me about it.
It's happening right now.
Yes.
We are at the forefront through the work of community justice initiatives in Langley. They work adding restorative justice to the justice equation for very serious incidents of harm.
Can you give me an example? Have you got a story of one? I mean, it's such a difficult one.
Well, there's many stories. So,
yes,
the famous ones are the Rena Verk story, yes, locally,
yes,
the Katie Hutchison story,
yes,
but there's many more. And what the participants in that process find is that it reduces their incidence of post-traumatic stress. They get answers to questions that didn't come out in the criminal justice process.
Like, what were you thinking and how did you end up there?
What were you thinking? Because the criminal justice process is about guilt or innocence.
Yeah, did you do it? Yeah.
And and in an adversarial process,
yes,
it's not about truth-telling necessarily,
right,
although that's what victims want, is the truth. And
yeah,
so they actually, through a series of meetings, carefully facilitated, they can get answers to questions that weren't answered in court. And I have a student right now that's looking at forgiveness as a healing agent that helps a lot of people move forward, particularly for victims of crime.
Yeah,
and
forgiveness is a weekend workship. I mean, that's a long conversation.
That's a very long, but she's
yeah,
fine. She's interviewed a lot of the people that community justice initiatives have worked with, and the results that she'll be presenting later this year in her dissertation defense are remarkable. And it's a long journey. It's a very long journey.
We have seen remarkable instances of people who have lost loved ones to violent acts, to murderers, who have forgiven the murderer openly, publicly, and you can tell from the depth of their hearts. And I must say that I, A, marvel at them, and B, I realize I'm not so highly evolved.
Right. No, what's come out in her data very clearly
yes,
is this huge continuum of why different people choose to forgive for different
yes,
reasons. Part of them is releasing themselves to move forward because
of course,
they
yeah,
get stuck in a story and
yeah,
it really tears them apart. They suffer huge amounts of post-traumatic stress, and what comes out in the evidence base that's really powerful in these randomized control trials that are currently happening in England, and I'd like to see more trials here.
yes,
But the reduction of post-traumatic stress for victims is remarkable.
So let's talk about the payoffs. Part of them is in dollar savings, which I want to get to in a second, but let's talk about the social and emotional benefits of this kind of process.
I think that's the clearest part.
Yes.
The social and emotional benefits of participating in a restorative justice process, it addresses things that the court system can't. The court system is really important, but restorative justice aims to be social and emotionally intelligent, to bring together what has been broken,
yes,
to reduce that visceral experience that we hold inside ourselves. When you're sitting in a restorative justice process, you can almost see the release of that shame.
Yes.
In the responses, people coming together, having really deep, heartfelt conversations. So I think that's what restorative justice adds the most, and particularly for victims, because their voice is not fully heard.
It's funny, as you're talking, I'm thinking about a divorce case that I'm familiar with, and how the law demands that the two parties involved in the divorce set up this adversarial narrative,
Right.
which had nothing to do with anything. And you go, excuse me, to your lawyer and say, that's not, what are we talking about? And they say, relax, that's just what we have to do in court.
Right.
It has nothing to do with the emotional truth.
That's right.
Right.
So restorative justice is often couched in the sense of, to heal what has been harmed.
Yes.
Both at an individual level, particularly for victims, and I would love to have, us to see the same process in the context of the riots, because that was a community harm too. And add the
it's a huge community harm. It's a blight on the whole city.
That was evidenced and witnessed when people in droves came out to rebuild the pride they felt in Vancouver. And I think that's what restorative justice can add.
I think I'm like a lot of citizens. I want to get in a room across a table from the kids who did all this, and I want to yell at them for about an hour and tell them what schmoes they are.
Yeah, I think Vancouver is ripe for a conversation. Many of my colleagues through the Vancouver Association of Restorative Justice, we've all been speaking to young offenders that are going to be charged anyway. And I should say that, I think it's 84% of the 115 or 116 cases currently before the courts. They've never had any previous contact with the courts.
Yes.
No previous charges, but they want to step forward. Many of them want to step forward.
They're not career criminals.
I don't think they were career criminals. And they are accountable to the city. But do we want to just do it in the court? Right. I think many people.
And that's not what career criminals do.
No,
career
that's
criminals are busy doing other things.
That's right.
And they got more brains than to run around.
I think we're ready for another conversation.
Right.
A number of the people involved in the regular criminal justice processes have agreed to do a demonstration project with 20 cases, and we're currently raising awareness about that and hoping to do some fundraising as well.
Now, why is there such a thing even? Why does it exist, a North Shore Restorative Justice Society? What does that do? Who are they?
There's community-based restorative justice
yes.
societies all around the Lower Mainland. They were an innovation in the 1990s when British Columbia was at the forefront of the restorative justice movement. And so most of them get local funding on the North Shore. We get money from North Vancouver City, North Vancouver District, West Vancouver Municipality, and they all fund us along with some seed money from the province. And so we do a lot of diversion cases.
Like, what does that mean?
So when the police decide that it's appropriate for them not to go through a regular court process, they can divert the case to North Shore Restorative Justice.
Uh-huh. Yeah. What's your sense so far of police endorsement?
Well, I can tell you on the North Shore, the North Vancouver RCMP, the West Vancouver Police are highly supportive of our practice.
They like it.
They like it, and we've done independent reviews and evaluations, and our satisfaction rates are great. Which is another thing in terms of the clear evidence based around restorative justice is participation in restorative justice increases victim and community satisfaction with the justice process. So those are really important.
That's huge, because so many people, including many people that I know very closely, have absolutely no faith in the criminal justice system.
That's right. And I think we would strengthen it if we added more people's voice to the whole process.
Yeah, because you feel if you are a victim, I've rarely been a victim of anything, but especially of a crime. Somebody broke into our house once many, many years ago. You do feel really assaulted and helpless. You just feel like there's no going anywhere.
That's right. And that's the clearest effects for why we should be practicing restorative justice is the outcomes for victims and communities. It really is extremely helpful for us moving ahead to be a healthy society.
What's your sense of the offenders really taking advantage of these processes? Do you find the occasional one who's kind of a sociopath and just doesn't get it, or do you find some who just are terribly defended and resistant? And
well, because we work in concert with the criminal justice process, we often don't get those cases. We let the traditional justice system take care of that.
You're going to pick people that you think might get it.
Well, you know, there's a process that we go through before we bring people together.
Oh.
And if we don't think people are ready to come together, if people haven't taken a certain level of responsibility for their actions, then we don't bring them together.
So you'll sit with an offender and interview that offender for a while and try to get a sense of where he or she is coming from.
There's always those initial meetings before we have the face-to-face conversation, because people have to be in the right spot, and there has to be, and often the responsibility is just not on the offender. There's a little story over here that no one's heard, and a little story over there.
Yeah. And what's your sense that about 90+% are ready to rock and roll, are ready to get involved?
It's hard to know. I wish I knew that statistic, because we don't keep reliable enough data. I mean, one of the recommendations for that came out of the Green Paper review from Jeff Cowpers says we need more restorative justice, but alongside that we need to roll it out slowly with little demonstration projects.
It's funny how cautious we are.
Yeah, we are very cautious, but we have a lot of great, good reason to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Brenda, thanks so much.
Pleasure.
Yeah, wonderful to have you here, and you're doing great work. It's important work.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, folks, that's pretty much it. Next week, Maureen Webb, an old friend of mine who has this whole other side of her, this career. She's a casting agent for the movies, but she's involved, she and her sister involved, working with kids at risk, a thing called Project Limelight, and it's fun and it's exciting, so we're going to welcome her here. davidberger.com, the site to go to again, and we thank you for joining us here on Shaw Community Television, Cable 4. Good night.